Welcome to Huddle Up with Matias Bueno. Today, we have an amazing guest from SB Nation's Secret Base video producer, Seth Rosenthal. Seth, it's a great pleasure and an honor to have you on after being very familiar with your work. And as many of my listeners love diving deep into the nitty gritty oddities of sports, it's finally great to sit down and be able to have a chat with you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
You've been with Secret Base, or I guess SB Nation as it was known before that avenue of videos, for quite some time. And from our previous conversation, I'm not sure if you ever could have envisioned having gone down this path from when you graduated from university. And now here you are making videos about some of the craziest, weirdest, but also some of the most significant moments in sports history. What has been the general consensus in your mind on this journey to creating videos, producing, collabing, and doing a lot of research on sports that might not have been thought possible before?
You are correct that I never saw this coming. The only reason I have the job I have now is that when I was in high school, when I was in college, I did a blog about the Knicks just on my own time. And that sort of grew and grew until I was spending a lot of my time doing that, and SB Nation became a thing. And yeah, I don't know. I'm one of the few very fortunate people for whom a hobby has become, or at least led to, a job. And I was doing a whole lot of other stuff at SB Nation before I ever got this opportunity. Some of it not particularly rewarding, some of it not, providing as as fun and creative outlet as I have now. So it took a long time, but I am very fortunate and very happy to be, like you said, doing research that's a lot of fun, helping people understand what's great about sports, and, sharing the things I love about basketball in particular with anyone who wants to watch.
In particular, one of the most iconic series that Secret Base now has is the video series you appear in often in Rewinder. I think it's a brilliant idea. It covers a lot of good games, but I guess the other side of the double-edged sword is that there's so many games and so many moments that it's hard to fit them all in, do research. I mean, it takes a long time to make a video that's that detailed, especially when it comes to editing. Holy, for anyone who's edited for one day, you'll know how long it takes to make those videos.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, I certainly can't take any credit for the editing. I'm lucky to work with editors, motion graphics artists, directors who make that stuff great. It's a small crew. It's usually me and one or two other people. But yeah, one of the nice things about Rewinder that you identified is that there's kind of an endless font of material there. In any subject where there's this one really iconic moment, like a big shot or a big defensive stop or a big field goal or a big, game-winning touchdown or a walk-off home run, really it doesn't have to be at the end of a game, any big moment where, the outcome, the thing that happened has the potential to get sort of tokenized and overshadow all of the context, all of the storylines. Anytime there's a subject like that, we take that opportunity to sort of put people in the moment. Like, okay, if you had just walked in the room when this big moment was about to happen, what would you need to know to understand it? If someone was like, wait, hold on, before we watch this, I need you to know that these guys are rivals and this guy has been, had missed his last 10 shots and, whatever, she almost went to this school, but any of that context that you would know if you were watching that moment when it happened and reacting to it live, we want to sort of recreate that experience for people. And there are endless possibilities there. And so it's sort of it's the series that keeps on giving for us. And I can't see us ever stopping that particular series.
Since you're a big person or a person who's big into basketball, there have been a ton of basketball ones, from Kawhi's shot to, Kobe buzzer beater. What have been some of the ones that stick out to you the most that you really, really, really enjoyed making? Because there's obviously a lot. I mean, you enjoy making probably all of them, but what are some of the ones that really stick out to mind or that you were really excited to finally dive into?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's, and I read a lot about stuff where I didn't really remember much of the history going back to it. and then other times where I feel like I could have written it from memory if I really needed to. But for those second ones, I often find stuff. I often don't know it as well as I thought I did, which is a long preamble to say that we did one about Allen Houston hitting the series-winning shot against the Heat in '99. That must have been, yeah. Um, so for the Knicks 8 seed upsetting the Heat in the first round on a game-winning shot in Miami, and that's one of the most important, most exciting moments of my entire life as a fan. I'm a very big Knicks fan, and that was one where I went in like I know all of this, and there was so much context, so much to understand about where the Knicks were at that point that I didn't remember, and it was so much fun to like go back and read the same articles I was reading, when I was 10 years old, to sort of recreate not just how a person might have felt watching that moment, like I was describing, but how I felt at the time. Was a lot of fun. I would say that, and like, it's a pretty unusual one, but we did one about the game-winning shot in Space Jam. Michael Jordan's arm stretching all the way across the court to dunk at the buzzer, and I tried to play it as straight as I could and weave real life with fiction. And I had a lot of fun making that one. That was one of my favorites. That definitely stands out.
The 99 Knicks have to be one of the strangest teams to run to the finals in NBA history, just for the fact that there was the lockout, that they were an 8 seed. I think they were the first 8 seeded team. I think they're the only 8 seed team ever actually to make the finals. And again, they came against the Spurs. The Spurs were amazing. If you haven't seen the video, please go watch the rewinder and Allen Houston's shot. It's incredible. It's pure theater. It's just so entertaining to watch. I'm not a person that's ever been, against the Knicks, really. I mean, growing up as a Raptors fan, like, yeah, the Knicks are in the same division, but like, it wasn't really like the Knicks were usually a way better team. And because they have such a deep history in the NBA, I find that sometimes they get overlooked with like some of the teams they had that were incredible. Like the Knicks have struggled recently and now they're back. But that 99 Knicks team was really something else.
It was a lot of fun. And again, like something that I was reminded of in digging into that research is they were one of the it was a short season because of the lockout, like you said, and they were one of those teams that was way better than their record. They had just acquired new people. They didn't really get a proper training camp, with like Marcus Camby on board, Latrell Sprewell working his way in, and yeah, they had this really fun team that, because the season was short, because they started so abruptly, this team was hitting its stride like right as the playoffs were beginning. So they didn't have a very good record. They barely snuck into the playoffs, but they were really good, and not anywhere as near as good as the Spurs. And it took, a big shot here, another big shot in the Pacers series. It took these crazy strokes of luck, and clutch shooting to make it as far as they did. But even as a kid, I could appreciate, like when they went down to the Spurs, it was like, yeah, that hurt. Losing the finals hurts, but that run was, you couldn't take anything away from that. It was incredible.
I know that Knicks fans now have been known to be some of the rowdiest in the NBA, and they have some interesting personalities. What's your experience been like as a Knicks fan, and how do you, I guess, compare the media view and contrast it with what it's like in real life in terms of going to games or seeing people on those I don't know what the proper name is, but everyone has seen the sound on TikTok and the Joe Byron and
Yeah. Side talk.
Side talk, yeah, like Side Talk NYC. Like, what is that, like a microcosm for the culture of like New York sports in general, or is that just like New York as a city and the team just happens to be there and they roll with the wave of quirkiness that the city embodies?
I mean, I could not possibly. I don't have the authority to claim what New York City is really like, or what the fan base is really like. I think every fan base contains that segment of people to some extent. Um, New York, it's a bigger city with more people packed more densely than other places. And we tend to get more attention if the team is doing anything good or bad. But yeah, there is, that those videos you're describing with the bing bong and all that are inflected in a particularly New Yorky way that sort of spans class and race and culture in a way that's I find kind of heartwarming. I have often said that every city on earth has its version of obnoxious asshole, but I'm from the New York area, so that's my kind of obnoxious asshole. But I don't think that I particularly fit the bill, in that I am not at a lot of games. Tend to run more just like morose and depressive than I do excitable like that. But I definitely uttered a few bing bongs when things were going well at the beginning of the season. Um, but you got to just kind of, whatever fandom you have, embrace the like worst and most grating parts of it, and just kind of have fun with it and not take it that seriously. That's, as I've gotten older, I've learned to just kind of take this all less seriously. It's better for my health.
Of course, when you cheer for teams that aren't perennial winners, like, and if you follow it seriously, you can't take their losing seriously. For someone like myself, who grew up my entire life cheering for teams that have been shit on and have done poorly, i.e., the Jacksonville Jaguars, Toronto Raptors, Winnipeg Blue Bombers in the CFL, my entire life were terrible until now.
Jaguars.
Yes, the
That's
Jacksonville
an own
Jaguars.
goal, man. That's not.
I get people, a lot of people saying to me, "What? Why do you cheer for that team? You must be the only person I've ever met that cheers for the Jaguars." In New York, I guarantee that you've probably never met a person that cheers for the Jaguars. Maybe one, actually.
I've worked with one, and he's from Florida. That's the only reason. But yeah, you don't mean a lot of Jags fans.
Like ever, like unless you
No.
go to London and people just can buy it at the NFL UK shop or something like that. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's unique. I kind of fell into it like the kid that chooses the team when you play the video game that's good in the video game, and then you go to real life and not, oh, like this video game's from 20 years ago, this game's from 2007, like the 1 year in between that they were amazing, and now here you are, you've grown into it. But I mean, I think the culture of the fan base is something that is really heartwarming, because they have to be the most loyal fan base basically out of any team in the NFL, and almost, you could argue, any team in North American pro sports, because they're hanging on by a thread. Like there's teams like, for example, like the Miami Marlins or Arizona Diamondbacks, like maybe those are obscure, but they're in major cities where it's hard to veer away from them having a team because of the money. But like Jacksonville, it's like, maybe it's big geographically, but like how many of the pro teams ever gone to Jacksonville before or ever will go to Jacksonville after? Maybe a baseball team, because the culture there for baseball has gone nuts. But outside of that, like it's a tough sell. So like you have to be super loyal and you have to be like really into it in order for the team to even exist. Otherwise, like they will sell their asses so fast, it's not even funny.
It is true. I respect the capacity you have, because like for me, so the first thing I was a Knicks fan. I've been a really diehard Knicks fan in my entire life. I watch all the games. I know what's going on. It's really a year-round thing for me, as you might suspect. And I am also, I watch Yankees games. I care about the Yankees. I watch Liberty games, but it's not nearly on the same level. When I was a kid, for reasons similar to what you're describing, I started to get into fantasy football, and like the Raiders were pretty good at the time with like Rich Gannon and, Jerry Rice and Tim Brown, all these old guys. And so I just started to get into the Raiders. And for a little bit as a child, I really loved the Oakland Raiders as much as I loved the Knicks. And then they lost the Super Bowl in, what was that, '02, where they got blown out by the Bucks. And I sort of had this moment where I was like, I don't have the emotional capacity to care this much about, especially because that was around the time the Knicks were starting to get bad. I don't have the emotional capacity to care about more than one team this much. And I just stopped following football like that day.
Oh, wow. So you don't gather around screaming outside of MetLife Stadium for the Jets or the Giants or anything?
Can't say I do. Nope. Don't have a football team. Don't really watch football at all at this point.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, but hey, every person from SB Nation has their niche, has their quirk. Like, do you follow baseball then, or like so?
Yeah, I mean, I don't follow baseball, the sport, that closely, but I watch a lot of Yankees games just because
Oh, okay.
it's like nice to have on in the background, and I pay attention to what's going on with the Yankees, but certainly less of a baseball person than several of my coworkers.
So then, would the Allen Houston shot, would that be like close to the peak of any Knicks basketball you've seen in your life?
Close to, I might. in terms of actual emotions involved, sort of divorcing it from what the actual stakes were, I think that Linsanity and just that month of basketball might have been more emotionally fulfilling. And honestly, the 2021 Knicks season and Julius Randle winning Most Improved Player and that happening when we were all locked down at home, I think those meant more to me, and maybe because they're recent and I was an adult. But in terms of like stuff that actually mattered, vis-a-vis the Knicks winning stuff and the Knicks being actually good and making it all the way to the playoffs, or making it deep into the playoffs, that Allen Houston shot and the Larry Johnson 4-point play that followed against the Pacers, yeah, those are the moments for me. There hasn't been anything really in the running since then where it actually like had playoff ramifications.
Because I was gonna say, like, I don't. The Knicks haven't been in the conference finals since '99, have they?
Not even close. No.
Oh, well, I mean, what was it? The Reggie Miller, like steal three. That was against the Knicks in like the early '90s, I think, right?
Yes, that was beforehand. That's a little. I was pretty young for that. That doesn't really have as salient a hold on my memory as late '90s stuff does. But Reggie Miller killed the Knicks a few times.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when you watch those things after the fact or when it happened before, when you were a young kid or too young to remember, it's like, well, this has already happened and people have already exhausted this, so I can't really sit there and emotionally mourn this moment if it already has passed, especially if you didn't even live through it.
Yeah, I'm glad that I'm of the age where like the 94 and 95 Knicks, who, one of those teams should have won a championship, but neither did. I'm glad that I don't remember those that well. That would have been tough to live with.
Like you start your life as a fan. Oh, we almost got there, and then just everything goes downhill after that.
It is a pretty weird, I'm 32, almost 33, so I was getting into sports when the Knicks were just always good and always competing, and they didn't win a title when I was a kid, but like it was always a possibility. And yeah, my entire adulthood they've been mostly garbage. I set myself up for a whole lot of pain.
I gotta ask, what kind of shows are you into that? Because you grew up in a generation, or I mean, relatively similar generation to me, but like, what TV shows did you grow up watching as a kid, or that you still are really fond of now?
I I mean I like kid stuff.
I mean, or it could be like, you could say like, oh, I grew up like whatever. I watched The Sopranos when I was like a teen, or I watched SpongeBob as a kid, or it still means something to me. Like, I don't. It doesn't have to be kids. It can be anything. But
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't grow up in like I wasn't allowed to watch a lot of TV. It was a battle. I listened to Knicks games on the radio a lot when I was a kid. Um, but yeah, I mean, I grew up watching Nickelodeon and like the Rugrats and Doug and Hey Arnold and all that and Kenan and Kel. As a teenager, I never watched The Sopranos, but I was really into like Arrested Development
oh
and The
yeah,
Wire. Um, I don't know. I feel like the ability to watch TV when it's not live, when it's not on, has only really happened as I've reached adulthood, or at least in my teenage years. But yeah, the Wire was definitely my favorite show. Like by the time I got to college, um, but I don't think I really got into watching TV the way people do now until recently,
I
for the
guess like
last 10, 15
sports
years.
too. Like, because I feel like I only watch TV if it's a show that like I watched Arrested Development after the fact, like when I was in grade 11. I mean, if I'm turning 26, like Arrested Development had already been off TV for like 7 or 8 years.
Right.
Or like Trailer Park Boys, I watched after the fact because it's popular in Canada, but or maybe South Park. That's like the only show I've ever watched that was like recent and still is going. But I feel like sports just takes up a majority of the time when it comes to watching things.
Yeah, I could usually get away with watching the Knicks if I'd done my homework on a weeknight, but yeah, I did not have a TV permissive set of parents, and so like I would get to school on a weekday or on a Monday, and everyone had watched The Simpsons, everyone had watched South Park, everyone had watched Family Guy, and I was not usually caught up on that stuff. But I could told you, that like fucking Lee Nalon set a career high in points the prior night in a loss to the Hornets or whatever. I was watching all sorts of useless garbage in the form of the Knicks losing.
It's really interesting because growing up as a kid, I remember when I first learned about basketball, maybe like 6 or 7 years old, I was like, wow, like New York, they must be a really good team. Because I mean, you're old enough to remember Sega Dreamcast, still have one kicking around playing NBA 2K, not 2K20 or 19, like the original NBA 2K 1 and 2 with Allen Iverson on the cover, and like Allen Houston was on the Knicks, and they were a really good team. And my perception in youth was that the Knicks were great, but obviously things have changed a lot since. But I mean, it's obviously sports. Like it doesn't, the Knicks don't put a roof over your head, so you don't have to be too emotionally invested to that point. But you at least get to dive into it with the stuff you do with SB Nation and Secret Base. So that's probably an enjoyable consolation prize, despite the Knicks' failure.
Yes, agreed across the board. I do not take for granted the opportunity I have, and as someone who has worked sports jobs where I did have to write about the Knicks, or I really had to stay on top of sports. And if I'm watching a game, I was working. The job I do now, I'm not reporting, I'm not recapping anything. I'm writing about history, and it has been in the last few years a relief to turn on a game at night and just relax. If it's the Knicks and they're down by 30 in the fourth quarter, I can turn it off. And if it's, a playoff game, I don't have to be taking notes or thinking about what I'm going to write or, forming opinions. I can just sit there and watch and enjoy it. And it feels good. It feels good to have a job in sports. It feels just as good to be able to be a fan. I'm very fortunate in that regard.
Because one thing I've learned from instructors in my sports journalism program, or even people who work in the industry, like their fandom has to take a back seat to doing their job. So for people in Canada, I know people that were working at 2010 Vancouver, like when Crosby scored the golden goal. Like imagine having to sit there and be like, okay, what's the time of the goal? What are we going to write about? Yeah. And like people want to soak in that moment, like a once in a lifetime, to quote Chris Cuthbert. But could you imagine like covering the Knicks and you're at the finals and boom, like whatever, Randall hits a shot to win game 7 like Kawhi, like you throw the pen in the air and say, fuck the job, man. Like I've been waiting my whole fucking life for this.
Yes, I've had to write about the Knicks plenty. I've never had to write about them objectively, where I had to pretend I didn't care what was happening, but I cannot even imagine that. Yeah, not for me. I'm just too invested.
Some of the other videos that I think are very interesting relate to like the weird rules. Which one of those did you think really caught you off guard the first time that you were doing the research for the video? Because I remember the one that sticks out to me was about when I think it was not St. Vincent, but Bahamas versus somebody in soccer, and they had to one team scored an own goal. If they scored an own goal, it helped them win an away goals or something crazy like that. But what are some of the ones, like, is maybe that one sticks out to you? What are the ones that stick out?
I think it was Grenada was that one. That one's complicated where the team was intentionally trying to score, let the other team score. I wasn't part of that one, so I don't remember it quite as well. But I've had fun, that series has been an entry point for me sometimes into sports I don't know as well, like hockey. Like I remember doing one with a legendary coach whose name I'm not going to remember, who was just very into like bending the rules of the game. Like a lot of the rules in the NHL and across hockey exist because he found loopholes. So like he was the dude who would instruct his goalkeeper to like form a little mound of snow in front of the goal until the NHL was like, no, obviously you can't do it. We didn't say that, but you shouldn't do that. We're making a rule now. And in general, that series is fun because sports are taking chaos and ascribing rules to them. And a lot of that is making it up on the fly. When you create a sport, you don't necessarily know what's possible. When they invented basketball and put the rim 10 feet above the ground, I don't think they were necessarily imagining like, oh, there's going to be a kind of guy that can just jump up and slam the ball right through the basket. And so people every decade have to be like, oh man, we didn't think of this. How are we going to legislate this? And you have to sort of work backward as people, explore the game and find loopholes and find new things and advance in their physical abilities. You have to go back and uh, remake the game to accommodate that and make sure it's still fun and fair and entertaining. And that series it tends to be pretty casual. It's a little easier to shoot, but like I learn a lot from doing it, and it makes you think about sports sort of sideways in a way that I think helps me appreciate and understand, when I'm just watching a game.
Is hockey something that you find is very, very unpopular where you're from, or it's pretty decently popular? Maybe not compared to like basketball or football or baseball or anything.
I mean, I know hockey fans. I grew up with hockey fans. I grew up in Jersey, so like, and the Devils were very good for a lot of the years. And so, yeah, I grew up among a bunch of Devils fans. I can think of friends of mine now who are Rangers fans, but um, and I certainly work with hockey fans. But no, I mean, in regular life, I am not coming across a lot of hockey fans. Certainly nowhere near the number of baseball or basketball or uh, NFL fans, I meet regularly. It's just not as big here, and part of that's being in New York, where there's just so much to choose from if you want to follow pro sports, and I guess part of that's just being American, but yeah, it's I got nothing against hockey. It's just never been my sport. Never played it. Didn't watch it much growing up, but it's fun, and I know people who are into it, just not as many as the others.
For someone like myself who grew up in Winnipeg, that's probably the most popular sport. But I mean, my parents are immigrants, so I didn't grow up loving hockey. I can't even skate well enough to play hockey, so it's not something that I really loved growing up. I definitely have an appreciation for it, but I find it interesting how in some places in the U.S. like hockey is almost number one, but in other places like New York, the Rangers have been good and the Islanders have been pretty good. I mean, the Islanders are the only team, I think, one of the last team in NHL history to win more than three in a row, which is crazy to think about. But hey, it took place right before the Gretzky Oilers era, so pretty well forgotten unless you are an Islanders fan or hockey historian.
Yeah, it's funny. So I lived in Brooklyn for 8 or 9 years, and the Islanders were playing at Barclays Center for a few years, and it was really cheap. So I think I only went once, but I went to an Islanders game, and I was sitting there up in the bleachers looking at the rafters, and I don't know what the years are, but it was like Islanders Stanley Cup, Islanders Stanley Cup. And I was like, that was when I learned that. I was like, shit, the Islanders were really good. Has anyone ever done that?
77, 78, 89, and sorry, 77, 78, 79, 80 was the 4
Yeah,
years.
but I got to be the first person at a hockey game to learn hockey history from actually looking at it. Like when someone hung them up, they were like, this will catch people up to what the good times were. And I was that guy that actually like found out about hockey from looking at a physical banner in a physical arena.
I think the same could be said for anyone who's maybe never watched basketball. If you go to a Celtics game or even with the Toronto Maple Leafs, there's a lot of people that have retired numbers. I mean, I've never been to a Leafs game because it's basically like trying to go to, actually, I don't know. I don't know if there's a New York comparison because some New York sports don't even seem that expensive if the team sucks. But the Maple Leafs are basically as expensive as it can get here. Like it basically like going to a regular season game would be trying to get like Yankees playoff tickets or something. I don't know. Like, okay. So New York, I really want to ask about this because I know if you've lived in the area, like you have to have at least some sort of opinion on it. What are some of your favorite pop culture artifacts that take place in the New York/New Jersey area where you grew up? Because there's lots to choose from. And I'm sure when you grow up in areas close to where things take place, like a Seinfeld, Spider-Man, like The Sopranos, whatever it may be, like Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Yeah.
How has that, like, what is your perception on things that are icons in pop culture that are from the New York, New Jersey area?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I'm from Jersey. So yeah, you got closest with Sopranos. Like I have not watched The Sopranos all the way through, but it was exciting. They would film that near where I grew up in North Jersey. The I even think they mentioned the town I'm from at one point. But so I'm from Sopranos country. I'm from Harold and Kumar country that takes place in North Jersey, sort of like bridge and tunnel area. Um, and like Kevin Smith movies like Mallrats, like that's what I feel my upbringing represented in that kind of, or like The Station Agent, and that kind of stuff from the burbs more than I do New York stuff. Um, yeah, I mean, so when I watch like the classic New York movies and TV and stuff, a lot of it is, it's really cool. It's educational. It's fun to see what New York was like in the 70s, or I guess to see, when I watch like Succession, for instance, it's like, oh, I can see my office. Like they're in the area where Vox Media is located. But to see anything that touches on like where I lived when I was in Brooklyn, that would be like Broad City or High Maintenance, was often around there. But yeah, again, like I don't claim New York, and vice versa, in a way where I could honestly be like, oh yeah, that's a true like New York movie or true New York TV show, because that would be faking it. But yeah, Harold and Kumar, that's my neck of the woods.
It's interesting that some of these movies, like, because New York, the whole New York Toronto comparison, like, yeah, like, man, like we were talking before, like if anyone tells you that they live in Manhattan, or when they say they're from New York, like they're probably lying to you, unless they're really rich, but then they probably won't be talking to you. Like,
Yeah.
I guess growing up in Canada, like Winnipeg has had some famous movies filmed there, but not ones that like jump off the page. Like if you're from Vancouver, it's like, oh, well, Rambo First Blood was filmed in Hope, BC, like close to Vancouver, right? Like, or whatever movies are filmed in Toronto. Like, obviously, as you work there and hang around the area, I'm sure that it's definitely cool to see. But yeah, the ones that would hit home would definitely be from North Jersey rather than, well, Manhattan, like, unless you've traveled around there. Because like for people from Canada, it's like, wow, like we wouldn't really know the difference unless we've been there. But definitely Harold and Kumar, like that is a classic one. I think is super iconic. Even Mallrats, one that maybe people wouldn't know necessarily as much about, the View Askew universe, is a great series of movies. I've seen almost all of them. But yeah, I'm sure then you've kicked it at White Castle, then is what you're telling me?
Not that particular White Castle, but the Harold and Kumar story and experience is certainly familiar to any dork who grew up in New Jersey. That something occurred to me is, what's I think the best New York show is Sesame Street.
Really?
Sesame Street really, like, if things that feel like New York feels to me. I mean, part of it is I lived in the city when I was a very little kid and grew up lived the first few years of my life in the vicinity around the time I was watching Sesame Street. But Sesame Street, I was racking my brain, trying to think of more New York stuff. And Sesame Street's like, they get it right. That sort of feels like a neighborhood in Brooklyn, in a way that other shows maybe don't quite as much. But you touched on something important, which is that like half of the shit that says it takes place in New York was actually filmed in Vancouver. Probably the same thing for a bunch of other cities. Don't they film everything in Vancouver?
Yeah, Vancouver has a lot of stuff they filmed there. I can't think of any movies honestly off the top of my head that were right within the city, but like I just know Rambo was filmed in Hope, which is like a small rural town on the Canada #1 highway east of Vancouver, because that's right in the valley where you would see that kind of scenery. But Winnipeg has been compared to like Chicago of Canada. Like they have a lot of old style buildings from like the 40s and 30s that have been preserved. And they've had a lot of like famous people, I guess, come through, and they film a few scenes in Winnipeg, but not anything like, oh, like Spider-Man, like you see on TikTok, like, oh, like look at this pizza place from Spider-Man, like this guy was Mr. Z's, or like, this is the apartment where Mr. Dickovich goes, rent, like, never, like, I mean, not like that famous, but I mean, Vancouver, a lot of, again, the lower mainland of BC is so huge, and everyone says, oh, I'm from Vancouver, but they're from like Burnaby, or they're from Port Coquitlam. Like they're not actually from the city of Vancouver. Like same thing in Toronto. Like they're not from the city of Toronto. They're from Scarborough or they're from North York, and they just, it's too confusing to explain the geography. But with a city like Winnipeg, it's like, well, Winnipeg is just one square. Like there's no greater areas and suburban areas that people leak into the city from to claim their fame and status. Not that there is any from Winnipeg, but yeah, like Toronto and Vancouver will be the more similar comparisons to like the Los Angeles, New York of the US.
Yeah, if I'm talking to someone like from another country and they ask where I grew up, I'll just, near New York. I'm not gonna, if I'm talking to someone from around here, I get into like, well, North Jersey, like an hour from the city, Morris County, that kind of stuff. But sometimes you just got to be efficient when you're describing your background.
I also want to ask you about having worked alongside someone like Jon Bois, because some of the videos he creates are just out of this world with research. And I'm like, man, like if I had time to sit down and make a 6-part like mini Netflix documentary about the history of the Jacksonville Jaguars, like he did with the Falcons, like I would probably develop severe depression. Like definitely not subjecting myself to the sadness that is what was the great history that has now turned to the atrocity. But what has it been like working alongside someone like him, or having at least a working relationship with a guy that has a great perspective on some of the deepest corners of sports oddities?
Well, first of all, I want to give Alex Rubenstein his flowers. He helps out with a lot of the stuff Jon's working on. They make that stuff together, like the Falcons documentary, the Mariners documentary, and Alex has an unbelievable wealth of information in his head, understands sports and statistics better than anyone I've ever met. And he makes a great compliment to Jon, who has a really good theoretical eye. He sees the narrative and stuff. He's extremely funny, and finds, things that are absurd, but also illuminating in basically any sport, including just the grungiest, grimiest, sort of saddest things in sports. Jon is, I think, a genius, genuinely a genius. One of the cleverest people I have ever met in my entire life. And someone who would instill within me a great deal of professional envy and self-doubt. Does sometimes, frankly, but doesn't all the time, because he is also one of the nicest people I know. Just a delightful person to work with, someone I consider a real true friend who, cares about the rest of us. He's incredible. Jon is one of a kind, and it's extremely exciting to work with him every day. And we tend not to be working on the same projects, but when he runs stuff by me, when I get to run stuff by him, it's always fun. He's a good person to talk to about anything. He, like many of my coworkers, I haven't seen in a couple of years because we've sort of just been dispersed in the pandemic, and I miss him dearly. He's a great dude. And way more like down to earth and just regular and agreeable than you would expect of someone whose command of their material and whose sense of style and presentation is so out of this world. He's just like a decent, likable guy, which is about the best thing you can be, while also being a fucking genius.
And I'm glad that you did give the nod to Alex as well, because his name is on the credits just as equally with much of the great work in terms of producing videos and doing research and helping. Like it's not all, a one-man band by any means, but definitely a lot of great folks that you're able to work with at Vox Media through SB Nation. And even like that was really my introduction to like watching any of the SB Nation and Secret Base videos. It was like my brother, he's like, hey man, like he knows that I'm a person that I love obscurities in sports. It's my favorite thing in the entire world. And he was like, man, like, you're really going to like this video. I was like, what is it? He's like, it's called Scoregami. I'm like, what does that mean? He's like, just trust me, man. Just watch it. And I watched it. And after that, like crushed every pretty good, like all the chart parties, started watching Rewinder, Weird Rules. And then the addiction started. Like that, to me as a kid, I used to watch Sports Center top 10s, like, eating cupcakes at a wedding reception as a kid, but now it's like crushing the SB Nation and Secret Base videos is a real treat for me. And especially when you get to when there's a video about your team and it hits home, it makes it that much better. Maybe not the collapse of the 2017 Jacksonville Jaguars. That was really hard to watch, even though I knew every single detail, nook and cranny about that video. beforehand. It's not a point of pride, but I definitely the other day, actually, super really weird story. Africa Combinations is happening right now, and there's a lot of teams that have made it before for the first time. Mauritania, Comoros,
yeah.
I think Gambia is one of the other ones. Sierra Leone, another first. So those are 4 rookie teams. And I was trying to look back and find what team is the smallest or is the greatest underdog that has achieved the most. Now, most of the teams that win are usually teams that are very successful, like Egypt, Ghana, Nigeria. But I found an outlier in 1998 in the 3rd place playoff. Democratic Republic of Congo beat Burkina Faso, and I was like, that's really weird. And the reason I'm sharing the story is because I think someone like you would have an appreciation for like how random it would be to stumble upon this. So I go and I click on the tournament in 1998, and I scroll down to the game, and it says that that Democratic Republic of Congo won 4-1 on penalties after tying 4-4. And I was like, 4-4, that's a high scoring game. I go and look in the notes, and I see Burkina Faso was up 3-0 until 76 minutes. And then Democratic Republic of Congo pulls one back. Then in the 86th, Burkina Faso scores again, 4-1. Game over. Just kidding. In the 88th, 89th, and 90th, DR Congo scores 3 goals in 2 minutes, go to penalties and win 4-1. And when I saw that, I was like, that is something like, it's not LeBron James coming back from 3-1 down. It's not the Red Sox coming back from 3-0, especially it's just 3rd place. But like, those are the kinds of random stories that you very rarely find without being one of those people that dives headfirst into the dumpster for the obscure thing. It's just like, when I see that shit, it's like, man, that's why I love the videos you guys do. It's just so many random things, but
that feeling is what I think a lot of us at Secret Base live for. We're, just that feeling of being like, wait, hold on. Has anyone written about this? Has anyone dug into it? And like, anytime you get to that, you have to then back up and remember, like, someone lived through this. There is someone out there who knows everything about this and cares about it and remembers it. And so when you're writing about something, whether it's obscure or just very specific, like, I try to write everything where, unless it's like about the Knicks and I really feel like I know as well as anyone does about it, I want to make it so that someone who's never even heard of the people involved before feels like they got caught up and can understand it. But I also want to feel like someone who knows it better than I do and always will feels like I, validated, like I did justice to the feelings I felt around that thing. But yeah, I mean, like we've gotten at Alex, John, myself, all of us at Secret Base, I think finding a little loose thread and then just pulling that thread and seeing how far it goes is, you don't get that feeling every day at work, but when you do, you feel really lucky and you have a lot of fun with it. And that's, that's where some of our best work, some of our best ideas have come from. And I think what a lot of us have in common and what we identify with our viewers is that instinct, that just like primal urge to see something funny in the data and just plunge all the way into it and figure out what is going on there, what's the story there, what's the actual flesh and blood behind it. Because exactly what you're just describing, where you just see a little note, you see a score that stands out. You start from the place of looking at a big list where everything looks nice and orderly, or a statistical ranking, or a team, like here's the roster, and there's just something that seems slightly off. Got to go click on that and see what it is. Diving down that rabbit hole only leads to fun or drama, and tragedy, whatever. But like, there's a lot of interesting stuff that has not been beaten to death on the internet the way a lot of the more famous things have. And that's the most rewarding kind of work to do.
I think the way you described it initially about how sports is just chaos that is tried to be, civilly ruled over, is such a beautiful way of encapsulating how some of these stories come to be. Because even for someone like myself, who I mean, cheering for the Jaguars is like, I like cheering for teams that are unique and like where it's off the beaten path and people haven't gone there or don't know much about it. And I remember I don't, what series was this a part of? The one about the Marlins accidentally winning the World Series. Was that a rewinder or was that
That's a collapse. I didn't make that one, but yeah, that's a great.
It's a collapse. Okay. Okay. Cause I
Yeah.
remember when I saw that video, I was like, what? One of my friends is huge into baseball. He's like, yeah, man, like the Marlins have won the World Series minus the year of COVID, like every time they made the playoffs. I'm like, how is that possible? How is a team that people always mock to leave the city and they're gonna leave, man? They're so unpopular. They literally play in a gimmicky park. But how did they win the World Series, especially by accident? Like those are the kinds of things I like. That one to me just shocked the hell out of me. I was so surprised when I saw it.
Yeah, that episode is awesome. Yeah, I mean, and that's like the 97 Marlins are one of the coolest teams of all time. One of my favorite baseball teams ever. That was at a point in my life where I was much more invested in baseball than I am now. And like, that was amazing. And then, yeah, someone deliberately tore that team apart and then they fucking won the World Series again a few years later. Anyway, it's astounding.
Or even like the 2001 Arizona Diamondbacks. Like I find it so neat that like, this is the team that stopped the four-peat of the Yankees, like at the top of their game, like the most powerful they've basically been in franchise history in the modern era. And this random team out of nowhere that has barely existed just shows up and stops it like that.
Yeah.
I mean, as a Yankees fan, maybe that's not great to relive, but as a general fan of baseball or of chaos in sports, like that's another interesting one.
Yes, that was. I mean, we talked earlier about my favorite episodes to work on. That was one of my favorite, in part because that's one of the. I wasn't as much of a Yankees fan then as I am now, so I don't really care. That is one of the coolest moments in sports history. I mean, just the stakes involved, but also like part of the research there was remembering something that was really salient as someone who grew up in the area. But like that was the first major sporting event after 9/11, and I think the emotional fallout of that and all of that was part of it, but also like part of Rewinder, part of making Rewinders, you go back and you watch the whole game and you sit through the commercials, you sit through the announcers, you watch some of the prior games. You really just try and like put yourself back in whatever, November 2001. And part of working on that, as is the case with Rewinder, now and then, was like remembering American culture and politics and just what TV looked and felt like immediately after 9/11 is fascinating, and sort of seeing the beginning of, I think, a long era of sort of jingoist American exceptionalism funneled through a Fox sports presentation is really interesting. And whenever I'm go back and relive a game like that and I pick up on stuff that's like not specific to the game itself but just sort of culturally part of the milieu at the time, I try to communicate that in the work itself. But that, it's funny you bring that up. That's another one where like it was really a throwback for me and sort of a re-education on something that I experienced the first time as a child and now got to relive and re-immerse myself in as an adult with several decades of hindsight.
There's many other teams in sports history, depending on how far you expand across the globe, that the outliers, it's really, really crazy. And I mean, in soccer, there's several examples in England I've seen, or other teams that they're almost like the little engine that could. And even though those stories are few and far in between, I still think that they're some of the best ones to cover, because how did that happen? How did this team go all the way there? Like, for example, one of the ones, are you a soccer fan? First, I should ask.
Very, very loosely, probably. I mean, are you about to talk about Leicester? Like, I know.
No, not Leicester.
Okay.
Because like Leicester, yeah, like any person's seen Leicester.
Yeah,
like,
okay.
One that happened just before you were born. I think it's 86. I think it's 88.
Mm-hmm.
A team that doesn't even exist anymore in the original form won the FA Cup. AFC Wimbledon in 1988 won the FA Cup. I think they beat Arsenal in the final. And that still to this day is probably one of the most modern, like modern day, like considering the context of the history of clubs, not like, Bury winning the FA Cup in 1904 when no one was good and everyone was amateur. Yeah. Like Wimbledon don't even exist anymore. They went bankrupt and they were sold. And now the current form they exist in is MK Dons, who play in League Two, the fourth division. The fact that AFC Wimbledon won the FA Cup in 88, like before the Premier League was because it used to be just English football Division One
Right.
before the Premier League existed. Like that is another thing I think deserves a deep dive of like, how did this team that doesn't even exist anymore, that was like the last division, climb all the way to the top and beat Arsenal?
That's a series theme that we've talked. I think we'll do someday. You know, we only have so much capacity, but like
Of course.
a series that's where each episode focuses on a particular outlier, I think would be a lot of fun. There's a number of things. You know, I sort of think of each. We all do think of each series as a bucket, and you try to find the things that fit into that bucket. And when you come up with a story that you really want to tell, a person whose career you want to describe, a game that was really cool, a season, whatever, and you're like, this doesn't really fit into any of our series, then it's like, it might be time for a new bucket. And that's one of those things where, like, I mean, there's a number of statistical and season outliers that are like really where, you know, whether it's from a statsy perspective like Alex and John might do, or trying to, you know, make it a little more looking at game footage, narrative based, whatever, however you wanted to approach it. I think that is a series we ought to do someday, and probably will.
Yeah, because what are some of the other ones that stick out in mind to you from at least North American pro sports of extreme outliers, maybe besides like the Marlins and the Diamondbacks that we've touched
Yeah.
upon?
It's something I've always wanted to write about. That's, you know, not the most exciting or monumental example of this. Derek Williams. You remember Derek Williams went to Arizona, probably drafted, early 2010s. Derek Williams was the second or third pick in the NBA draft because he shot the fucking lights out in college. You know, he was this really big athletic forward who shot like 40 something percent from three in college, and he's still an active basketball player. He's not in the NBA, but he might be playing in Europe right now. Point is, Derek Williams is a bad shooter. Was before, has been since. He is a bad outside shooter, but he had this one statistical outlier season in college at the absolute perfect time. You know, when people are like, can this guy shoot in the NBA? And there are probably better examples of that. Justice Winslow is probably another one, but you know, you take maybe 70 or 80 three-pointers in college and you just happen to kind of get lucky and hit 35 of them, and suddenly you're a lottery pick where you weren't going to be before. And I think that particular season, but that generally as a phenomenon, is something I'd love to write about, and it's like been stuck in the back of my head for a really long time.
That reminds me of like the video that John did about who's it, Troy and Van, was it, yeah,
the like really high scoring game.
yeah,
I'm not
what
going to
was
remember the teams. Yeah, the high school team. Yeah.
Troy
like
and someone else, some not Vanderbilt, but some really weird techie school, and seeing that I was like, that sounds like if a grade 7 basketball game went way better than expected in terms of just rifling the ball at the backboard and actually goes in more.
Yeah.
Oh geez, I'm just trying to think of other outliers in terms of like maybe championships. I know people say the Jaguars in 2017 were an outlier, but well, definitely were in the last decade. But
Alex has pointed out a really good one, that there's a year where it might have been the Raptors. It was either the Raptors or the Kings. I think it's the Kings. I think it's the Sacramento Kings. In the late 90s, they had a season where they won like whatever. I'm going to mess this up, so someone should look this up afterward. An NBA team that won 20-something games in a season. During that season, they had a streak of either 2 or 3 straight games in a row that they won by like 20 or 30 points. And I may be conflating two things. I think the things that I'm conflating, the Kings, I think, did what I just described. But the Raptors thing I'm thinking of is that the 96 Bulls or the 97, one of the really great Bulls teams.
The 96 Bulls Raptors beat.
Lost to the Raptors, yeah.
In Toronto, yeah.
So that kind of stuff is fun too, because I think you can obviously look at it from a statistical perspective, like how unlikely is this? What had to happen for this to transpire? But it's also fun to go back and read the paper from, you know, the day before and the day after, and just like see what people were saying at the time. Because it's, you know, a lot of those things, if it's a team that wins a championship that wasn't expected to, that becomes history. but other times it becomes a footnote to history of like, this Bulls team was the greatest ever, and they lost this one weird game, and that's it. If there's something where it's like a footnote and that's all anyone ever, that's the depth at which people usually investigate it, that's where we're like, all right, let's rip this whole thing wide open and like find everything there is to find about this particular story. But yes, I think the Kings had a really good, unbelievable streak during an otherwise terrible season, and the Raptors beat the Bulls when the Bulls were at their very best.
I feel like I heard another one about like, or people talk about teams that maybe it was the Kings as well, or the Timberwolves or something, one season where a team won one road game or something like the whole year, or like less, or 5 games or something. I think the Wizards, one of those 3 teams, went like less than 5 wins on the road in the entire year. And then the Celtics in the 80s did the opposite, where they didn't lose a home game, or they lost one home game or something like that, and then the rest of the games they lost on the road. But I don't know, there's always those, the NBA has the propensity for those things to happen because of like the nature of a long season. And hockey, not as much, because like in basketball, you'll usually see like 60-win teams, right? In hockey, like you'll never see a 60-win team. That's basically impossible. But you also never really see a team less than 10 wins. That's also very, very impossible. Or like less than 15. Maybe in the, like during the lockout, like post lockout in 2016-17, Colorado won 9 games or something, but that was like 66 games. It's like the Bobcats.
I think it's sort of like I think it's a matter of scoring and sample size. Like, there is so much basketball in a basketball game. And if, both of the teams are going to put up dozens and dozens and dozens of shots, then the law of averages will sort of take over. But you understand this, I don't need to explain it to you, but like in a sport like baseball or hockey, where like even the best hitters will only succeed a third of the time, even the best teams will have games there where they only get 1 or 2 runs. There's just like, there's more room for randomness, and that that's part of why baseball is like statistically the most exciting and interesting sport, and why basketball tends to be a little more like the best teams actually win. There's a little less room for chaos. But that sort of gets back to weird rules where like, you have these things that are by nature sort of fluid and chaotic, and then you apply strictures to them. Like, okay, we're only going to measure basketball success in 48-minute samples. That's going to create results that don't necessarily match what ought to be the case. And the more that things are rigid, the more that the sample sizes are small, like in baseball, the more you get some really weird shit happening. And there's an old XKCD comic about how sports fans are basically just like, what did the random number generator, shoot out today? All right, let's apply narratives to that and react to it. And, I think that's meant to make fun of sports, but I think that's a lot of fun. I think it's really fun when there's a random number generator and it, farts out something exotic, and then you just get really excited about that. I think that's cool. And that's part of what I love.
One of the other things that made me think of was how in baseball and hockey, teams have come back from 3-0 down, but basketball still to this day, no team has come back from 3-0 down. And the 2 closest teams were the Houston Rockets when Lillard hit the shot, or would have been close. Mm-hmm. And then I think it was the Knicks, or maybe it was the Knicks. I think it was like the 72 or something like that. Sometime in the early 70s, the Knicks were down 3-0 in the finals, and they came back, and I think they lost in game 7 or something like that. It was a Knicks team or the Lakers, one of those 2 teams, but I feel like it was New York. And that was the closest that any team has ever gotten to coming back from 3-0 down. Like, those are the kinds of things that make basketball exciting for fans of teams that are good, but also make it a bit dreadful for teams that aren't good or 8th seed. Like, do you think in our lifetime we'll ever see an 8th seeded team win the finals? Like, or a team come back from 3? We'll probably see a team come back from 3-0 down before the 8th seed finals. But like, I don't know if we'll ever see a team win the finals as an 8th seed.
I think it'll take something. If it happens, it'll be because the season is weird. There was a shortened season because it used to be that only lockouts could shorten the season, but apparently pandemics can do that too, and you can end up with weird playoffs. Or like I said, a team can sort of eat shit all year the way the 99 Knicks did, but if it's because of injuries and if guys get healthy at the right time, like you can really not be yourself until the playoffs come around. It has to be the perfect, confluence of events. But like we're getting at, basketball, because it's such large samples, because the season is 82 games, because you have to win the best of 7 games to win a series. It's not win or go home. It's not a single elimination. Like there's just less opportunity for something really weird to happen. The best team usually wins, but I don't know. It could happen, but it would take something sort of unanticipated for that to be the case, because the NBA, it's built to actually figure out who the best team is, and injuries and randomness always play a part, but like things tend to even out in a way they might not in other sports.
And the same thing with like how UMBC being the first 16th seed team to beat a first seed. How many years did that take? And that's one and done.
Right.
Like if that was the NBA, like Golden State beat Dallas in whatever 07. And that was like extremely shocking. But that was just the first round. And then Golden State got kicked to the curb the next round. Like, so that's why, like, when the UMBC thing happened, I was like, whoa, like a 16th seed versus a 1 seed winning, like in college is a blowout or a close game. Like it's very hard for those teams that are very small to win. But I guess never say never. It's happened 1 out of every whatever 100 something times.
Yeah.
So maybe if it happens a second time or whatever, then John can make a video about it, because I'm sure that he would love to dive into that, considering when you look at the video from his Pretty Good series, like the likelihood of all those events happening again is just like 1 in a billion or something. So 16th seed knocks off a 1 seed again, then maybe we'll see a video.
Probably.
So Seth, we are getting towards the end of our time in today's episode. So I want to ask a few more wrap-up questions, quick fire, and have a little bit more fun before we part for today.
Sure.
Who is your favorite childhood sports hero?
Kurt Thomas.
Really?
Oh yeah, I love Kurt Thomas.
Kurt Thomas is a legend, man. Like he played like forever and ever and ever. And there's a guy that my brother played with in Winnipeg who played like, he started playing university when he was like in his late 20s, early 30s. And my brother's like, this guy's the Winnipeg version of Kurt Thomas. And I loved how I was like, you have to know like basketball to know who Kurt Thomas is. But it's
yeah, I mean, the Knicks were not reliable after a certain point in my childhood, but Kurt Thomas was always reliable. Just picking and popping from 18 feet. And yeah, just probably my favorite Knick of all time.
If there was one NBA Finals that didn't involve the Knicks that you think should have went the other way, which one is it and why?
Should have, or I wish did go the other way?
Honestly, either or, like, because I don't know if there's any that you could argue should have, but if there is, then yeah, I'd like to hear it. Or if you wish would have went the other way, then that's also good too.
I definitely wish that LeBron won a championship his first stint in Cleveland. I mean, they didn't come close, but I wish the 07 Cavs pulled that off. Well, they didn't come close to pulling it off, but I wish they did. I wanted that badly at the time. A finals that should have gone the other way. I mean, like the Celtics really shouldn't have won it all in 08. And I mean I wish they didn't, because I still have to hear about that shit.
I didn't want them to win either, but like
Yeah.
what's I mean, I was only in 6th grade at the time, so here I wanted the Lakers to win and they didn't. I was like, what's going on? But like, why do you think they shouldn't have? Just because of the Lakers blowing it in the one game?
Yeah, I kind of think that the Celtics, this is not an informed opinion, this is just me being an asshole, but like, I kind of think the Celtics shouldn't have won in 08 because the Lakers were better. And I kind of think the Magic should have won in 09 against the Lakers. But I could not possibly defend either of those things.
Yeah, maybe less so the Magic, like losing 4-1, but like, I mean, and then people talk about all the roids and whatever, like after the fact. But I mean, Orlando, another outlier of teams that made the finals. Like, how did Orlando make it that one year? Next year, they're lose to the Celtics conference finals, and then we never hear of them again. Like,
yeah, but no, I mean, The I also think it would have been very cool had the Thunder won a championship against the Heat when they made it, but they were pretty overmatched.
True. And people always say, well, how did they not win a finals with those three guys? It's like, well, Westbrook just got traded to Lakers and everyone is freaking out. And now like they see what happens when you try to, everyone trips over themselves and you put too many stars on the same team that
Yeah,
all
and
need
I
to go.
mean, they didn't really get many opportunities to give it a. The fact that they made it all the way to the finals before those guys split up is pretty incredible. They didn't have a very long window there before, they weren't going to be able to afford that team anymore.
What has been your or three favorite videos, no particular order, that you've worked on personally for SB Nation / Secret Base?
Mm. Uh, well, I won't cheat by just naming the three, but I will definitely devote the number one spot to the gigantic Cavaliers miniseries we made last year, which is called Chosen, about the entire history of the Cavs up until their 2016 championship. I think that the Knicks collapse video that I made, while obviously reliving the pain of my childhood, it was fun. It genuinely was. It was exciting to write about something I knew really well. Also exciting, as I've described, to sort of remember things and find some details that I hadn't known at the time when I was, watching that happen in real time. Uh, I mean, honestly, and that Space Jam rewinder is like, because I didn't know I was going to be able to pull that one off. It was sort of a tough sell for my boss and stuff, but it turned out really well. I would definitely basketball things, and I'll throw in one more. I mean, you said three, but because I repeated myself, we did an episode of Untitled, which is, I think, one of the most fun research series to do. Examining why certain players never won a title, and sort of putting that in context and explaining it. And I did an episode about Marta, the Brazilian
Yes.
footballer,
Mhm.
that I really knew nothing about her besides having watched her in the World Cup here and there. But digging into her story and really like understanding the history of Brazilian soccer in a way that I had not at all beforehand, um, was very rewarding. And it's an upsetting thing to read about.
It's
Um,
very heartbreaking.
yeah, but that got a really good response. And when you can do something like that, that doesn't maybe touch on the usual topics you write about, the usual audience, you tend to find that is very rewarding. And I thought, you know, that was a difficult subject to write about, and I really tried to put a lot of consideration into getting it right. And based on the response I got, I felt like I at least did some justice to something that I think hasn't been covered to the extent it should be.
That one I found to be one of the most unique ones because it hits home. Growing up as a kid, half my family's from Brazil. I remember staying up and waking up early in the morning to watch Brazil versus Germany in the '07 Women's World Cup final. And when they lost 2-0 and just seeing how crushed Marta was, and then the loss to the US, it just the next tournament was even worse. And it's just so sad because like she's one of the greatest, soccer players in international women's history and the greatest in Brazilian history. And the fact that she'll probably go her entire career without getting a World Cup is just like, it sucks because in men's, like there's more diversity of teams that win because obviously it's been more established for many more years. But like in women's, it's like, well, if you didn't get lucky once against America, then too bad, so sad. Like they run the show, and then maybe you get like Canada getting the Olympic gold was amazing. Like everyone here was going nuts. But again, that like Christine Sinclair, like if she didn't win this last summer in Tokyo, like probably could go hand in hand with that video, like alongside Marta.
And so many of these things, part of Untitled, part of Collapse is, especially in sports that don't have a salary cap or international sports, so much of it is just investment. It's just how much did someone bother to make sure this team was good. And for Brazilian women's football, the investment has never matched that of the men's team. And like when you were younger than you were watching the '07 team, like if you had wanted to watch prior Brazil women's World Cups you mostly could not have, because they didn't even bother putting the games on TV. They weren't interested in, building up support for that team, even though it was a contender, even though it was incredibly good. And it sucks. It sucks to luck into, one of the greatest athletes in the history of sports, but not give the boost that every athlete ever has needed to become a champion, which is just investment and care.
And it seems like now that the investment has increased, it's almost like too little too late on behalf of her ability to succeed, because you see, like, the other half of my family's from Portugal, and it's like they're amazing in men's soccer, a country of 10 million people, like basically all of New York City is one of the best in the world for men. But then for women, like, they're atrocious. But now they've started to really pick it up because they've acknowledged its importance. And same thing with Brazil. But it's like, for the sake of Marta, like, you're going to look back, and she's probably going to look back, and when Brazil wins, it's like, damn, like, why didn't I have this? Right. Like, or I could have been a part of this if we would have done XYZ 10 years earlier. Like, being from Winnipeg, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in the CFL's 9-team league. Like, you'd think it's so easy to win. Like, there's only 8 other teams you have to play against, but you'd be mistaken. The Bombers, they had a near 30-year drought winning a championship. And one of the greatest players ever in the league's history, the greatest receiver ever, Milt Stegall, went to the Grey Cup twice and lost both times, and even shrugged off retirement the second time to finally get a chance to win. Didn't. And then guess what happens? He's been working with the panel, covering CFL games on TV for TSN, with like our version of ESPN ever since. And the Bombers just went and won back-to-back Grey Cups. And here he is sitting like, wow, like, maybe if the GM wasn't a fucking idiot, or maybe if, during the latter half of his years, or maybe if a few lucky bounces would have went our way in the earlier years, I'd have at least one Grey Cup, and he has 0. And obviously, if you're an amazing athlete, like, it's not like your life is treachery and misery, but like, to capture that final moment is what you really long for. And if you don't get to do it, like the Charles Barkley Untitled, like, it just sucks.
Yeah. And that's why Untitled exists. Someone's got to get the short end of the stick. Someone's going to get it 15 times in a row or whatever. But there's a reason, and it's never just like, oh, he's, wasn't clutch. And all of our series, we try to open stuff up and explain stuff and fully understand it. And that's one of those where, like, things tend to get flattened, history and personas tend to get flattened or tokenized, and we just try to, work against that.
My final question for you, Seth, is if there was one project where you had the chance to talk to every player, coach, fans, executives, whatever involved, money's not an issue. Like, Vox, like, pulls out the Rolodex of the reserve funds to give you everything you need to really understand every angle of a story. And this includes going back to the past, bringing back anyone who's passed away, and create whatever video for whatever series you like. What would that moment be, or who would that player be that you would sit down and chat with?
Oh man, see, I was starting to formulate an answer, but then you started adding like dead people in history and stuff, and now
maybe we could keep it to alive people. Maybe we could keep it to people who are alive, just as easier on your brain to process.
Well, all right, I would really love to, like, fully it's been done before, but the 73 Knicks, like the team that won 2 championships in the late 60s, early 70s. Dave DeBusschere's not alive. Red Halsman obviously isn't alive. Walt Frazier, Willis Reed, Bill Bradley all are. But, like, I would love to really understand that in a way. And, like, again, that's had books written about it, so it's not a good answer. I would want to give you an answer where, like, I don't feel like there's a definitive take on the subject. The answer that came to mind off the bat, and it's one where everyone's alive, but I think because of recency, for political reasons, we don't really fully understand it, is I want to really tell the entire story of Yao Ming. I think, how Yao Ming came to be, how he, his path to the NBA, his upbringing, and then how good he was, how unbelievably promising he was and exciting to watch. And then the reasons his career ended, I think, again, there's books about that. but I don't know that we fully get it yet. And I don't think people who don't remember Yao Ming fully get how unbelievably captivating he was. And yeah, if I could have unlimited resources to travel and, you know, translate and get around political barriers and, you know, have people sort of let their guard down and speak to me, I think getting to the bottom of the Yao Ming story, and that's just always something I've been interested in. And I don't think if you gave me a 24 hours to think about it, that would be my answer, but that was the first thing that came to mind.
Honestly, I don't even think that's like after 24 hours, like, I don't know how many more stories you could really dive deeper to that. Like Yao Ming was at the forefront of the NBA for quite some time, for like the first great player from China. Like I remember even watching videos about him first being in the NBA on Houston when they had the old like snickering looking rocket ship as their logo. And like when he dominated Shaq and everyone was like, whoa, like this is real. Like this is not a joke.
Yeah.
And how sudden it seemed his career ended, like injuries, and then obviously like, you know, the political barriers and the mystery of the political barriers as well, right? Like who knows why, how, like who really knows is what I mean. Like it's like obviously you can be told the whatever story, but like it's definitely one that's super fascinating. I actually didn't even expect that at all, but I'm glad that you did mention that, because growing up as a kid, it's like, oh, Yao Ming is like one of the tallest players ever, but it's like a guy from China being one of the tallest players ever, like a country that doesn't traditionally produce people that are like over 7 feet, right? Like that would be like if a 7-footer came out of Portugal. It's like that would never ever happen. Like that's an outlier right there. Talk about outliers and like you're analyzing the data. Like Yao Ming is like top of the list outlier when it comes to NBA. But maybe someday it'll be possible, and maybe, you know, in your lifetime you might get the opportunity to tell the story, and I think that would be really cool and to actually get to dive into.
Yeah, if you're watching or listening, which I'm sure you are, give me a call.
Seth, I really want to thank you for having been on today's episode, and I want to acknowledge you for all the great work you've put in with SB Nation and Secret Base. For all those out there, whether it be my friends, family, whether it be people on YouTube who enjoy the content that you and the rest of the team do, it is needed in this world. And I greatly appreciate the fact that you stumbled upon this opportunity to make videos for them, because I think it makes the lives of sports fans that much more enriched. So I want to let you know that as we part for today's episode.
I deeply appreciate that. That is precisely the goal, is to enrich the lives of sports fans. I'm not putting food on anyone's table. I might as well make them enjoy the things they enjoy more and more deeply. So I really appreciate that. And I had a lot of fun talking to you, and thank you very much for having me.
And thank you to the listener for enjoying today's episode with SB Nation and Secret Base video producer, Seth Rosenthal.